Welcome, everyone. We're really looking forward to this panel today. We are focusing, as Sansanar introduced, on the impact of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, on the investment landscape in Cambodia. We're very lucky today. We're going to be able to focus specifically on tourism and property. We were also hoping to be able to focus on the garment industry, but unfortunately, our representative from GMAC had to pull out at the last minute due to an important and pressing engagement with the government. So we left him to do that. We still have a very august and esteemed panel here who I will allow to introduce themselves, starting with His Excellency Makara Chhun from the Ministry of Tourism. Your Excellency. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. With respect to Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, to Chhun, ladies and gentlemen, actually, my name is Makara, Chhun Makara. Work from Ministry of Tourism of Cambodia. Actually, I am in charge of licensing on travel agent and transportation and also the tour guide.
Thank you. So we're delighted to have you here today. We're also Sivlin Chhay, who is joining us also from Phnom Penh. Sivlin, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sivlin Chhay. I am the president of Cambodia Tourism Association. And today, thank you very much for inviting me as one of the speakers in this important panel discussion.
It's excellent to have you. Thank you very much. We're also delighted to be joined by Tom O'Sullivan, who is Director and CEO of realestate.com.kh. Tom, please go. He's labelled here as Glenn, but he's actually Tom. Please go ahead and introduce yourself with your microphone.
Sorry, and pleasure to be on the panel today with everyone else. As Julian mentioned, I'm Tom O'Sullivan, the CEO and Director of realestate.com.kh, which was founded in 2009 by local Cambodian founder Mok Chenda, who's still our partner today. Our parent company, Digital Classifieds Group, invested in realestate.com.kh in 2015. And the platform brings together all the leading real estate agencies and property developers in the market to provide one convenient space online for property seekers to find their dream home, rental or office space in Cambodia.
Terrific. Thanks, Tom. We're also delighted to have Mr. Tapas Kuila, who is a general partner at Ooctane. Tapas, please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about Ooctane.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tapas, and thank you for the introduction. I am actually the general partner at Ooctane, which is a venture capital firm. We primarily invest in Cambodian startups, but at the same time, we also look into startups which do want to enter into the region and have interest in working with the Cambodian ecosystem. At the same time, we also provide investment and advisory services on the private equity side of things to our parent company, which is the World Bridge Group, which is pretty good and strong in logistics and real estate in this country. And thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure.
Fantastic. Tapas and Tom, I'm going to ask you to sit tight for a while because we're going to focus initially on tourism with His Excellency and with Ms. Chhay. And then we'll come to you to talk about the property and the general investment sort of landscape and what people should be looking for in terms of future investments. But let's focus on tourism because it's obviously a very significant part of Cambodia's economy and one that is obviously one of the most directly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic with incredible travel restrictions being placed on entry and exit from countries around the world. So my question to you, Your Excellency, is what is the government's current assessment of the state of tourism and what measures are being put in place to mitigate the negative effects of COVID-19 now and into the future? I mean, what more can Cambodia be looking forward to in terms of welcoming tourists back with such an important part of our economy?
Okay, I will reply to the question.
Thank you.
The signal here is not good. Okay, I will reply to the question. Yeah, I will hear you clearly.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, I will reply to your question. Yeah, I do have. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yes. 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 I hear you. Yeah. Okay. In response to your question, about the government assessment on the current and future state of tourism in Cambodia. Right now, we don't have any formal report on the assessment yet, but for my idea, here the tourism in Cambodia has been seriously affected because right now, till October, the number of international tourists come to Cambodia decreased 76%. And we expect that during 2020, we expect to decrease around 70 or 80% of the international to Cambodia. Right now, the business in tourism, about 30% have been closed. And the worker, about 46% has been suspended and fired. So right now we are in a serious situation. And we expect that the situation will continue until the vaccine is mastered in Cambodia. For the government, what should we have done and what should we have in place to mitigate the situation right now? Right now, the government also launched 6 rounds of support and protection policy, including tax exemption, monthly tax exemption, and also the support sponsor for the worker who has been suspended from work, $40 per month. And also we have the Ministry of Tourism have also requested the government to accept all the license fee of renewal for 2021. That means that the tourism license, they don't have to pay fee for their renewal for the license. And other than that, we also have another policy on the social protection for the business who has been suspended. For example, we don't have to pay for the social protection during the suspension, but you still get the benefit of social protection. And more than that, we have the newly policy in 6 round, exemption of the payment of patent tax, and also the nominal tax, and postponing the full audit for 2020. There are a lot of policy that government has been put in place for to help the business to recover. But we are not sure yet when the recovery will start because the COVID is still in process right now, and the government, especially Ministry of Tourism, we have elaborate a project. We request to the government. We call the green bubble project. That means allow the tourists to come to Cambodia with least restriction. Because before, right now in Cambodia, we never close our border to the foreigner, but we put the barrier, like a restriction that cannot allow the tourists to Cambodia. And from February, the government decided to close all the tourism visa T. So right now we don't have the tourists who come to enjoy their tour. We only welcome the tourists who come to Cambodia for their business and for their diplomat. So we expect that in the near future, after we got the vaccine, we will have a new project to request the government to open a freely border to another country. We expect to do with China for the first priority. So after that, we will see will the government with the business, tourism business, if they have any more issue concerning their business, we will see if the government we will continue the policy on postponing the taxation or something like that. We'll see together. And for the future project, tourism, our minister already assigned some projects, especially we are talking about the recovery plan. Recovery plan already done by our technical team, and we will to get approval from the government, and we start this recovery plan.
Now, I'm not asking you here to make any predictions, but how long do you think it will be? I personally don't see tourism ever coming back to the levels that we were enjoying in the lead up to the pandemic, because I think it's going to be so difficult and a challenge for people still to travel, even in the era of a vaccine. But do you anticipate that, is it going to be next year that we start to see the recovery, or the year after? What's the planning process look like at the ministry at the moment in terms of planning for the recovery?
Actually, I'm not sure about this, but we already put two scenarios about when the recovery plan will start. It will take about 3 to 5 years for the tourists of Cambodia to return back to the normal. It depends on when you get the vaccine in the country and to another country, because the tourist is inter-sector. So we cannot rely on ourselves. We just rely on another country also. For example, like China, USA, our priority market that come to Cambodia. So we plan at least 3 to 5 years for Cambodia, for the Cambodia tourism to be back on normal. But our minister said that we will do a separate project to get the tourists back to normal faster than that. Especially the bubble project, like I said before, the Green Bubble project, to a specific market like China, to boost the tourists faster than that. But at least 3 years.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Sivlin, that's some pretty grim news for the industry that you represent as the president of the Cambodia Association of Travel Agents. How is the industry adapting to this current crisis? Is local tourism picking up any of the slack, or are there other ways that we need to adapt the industry to meet this current crisis and the future redevelopment of tourism?
Okay, thank you for the question. And in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, the tourism industry has taken the hardest hit in terms of major revenue losses, resulting in more than half of the tour agencies facing closures across the country. The private sector has been adapting to the significant decline in tourist numbers by shifting their focus from international tourists to fostering and promoting domestic tourism. At the same time, we are quickly adapting to the new normal of tourism by strictly incorporating healthy safety measures that implemented by the Ministry of Health into our business practice, with the border being mostly closed around the world. It has given the tourism private sector the opportunity to further explore new tourist destinations and products in the kingdom, especially in the mountainous area, which has experienced a big boost in popularity amongst the locals since May. The number of people escaping to the mountain and experiencing hiking and camping has drastically increased now more than ever, bringing a positive impact to the livelihood of the local community in those areas. Yes, it is an undeniable fact that the private sector still needs more assistance from the government, especially regarding further extension of exemption on necessary business expenses such as tax and business license renewal fees. Furthermore, the most urgent and critical assistance from the government is the provision of loan with low interest to tourism business owners. Recently, almost all of the tourism business owners are struggling to maintain their stance in the industry by draining their own savings to provide support for remaining employees and basic expenses of the business. But last but not least, the execution of a travel bubble that is called a green bubble cannot be made possible without the initiation from the government sector. Therefore, the tourism private sector needs the government's push and initiative to plan and implement the green bubble with potential countries when the COVID-19 situation improves in order to begin the restart of the tourism industry.
Your Excellency, I want to ask a question. Has Cambodia been creative enough in the way it's dealt with this crisis? I've seen, for example, a small country like Bermuda, for example, has offered visas for people who are going to be working remotely, no matter where they are, to come and work remotely from Bermuda. I saw in the press yesterday that Thailand has just agreed that people who are doing their self-quarantine are now allowed to do that at certain golf courses, so they can work on their golf game while they're waiting to be released from quarantine back into society at large. So I'm wondering, has Cambodia been imaginative enough or creative enough in trying to keep the inflow of be they tourists or business people? Is there more we can be doing in this crisis to keep Cambodia in front of people as a viable destination?
Yeah, for the private sector, we imagine we want to do that way, yeah, but the government is still scared that we bring COVID to Cambodia. So.
But yeah, that's a realistic fear, of course, and one that we've seen actually playing out across the world. But I was asking His Excellency if do you think we need a little more creativity, maybe a little more kind of trying things differently? I mean, I know it's taken a long time to build up Cambodia's industry to where it was, but this crisis might represent an opportunity to look at things differently. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the same. Because, we want to boost the tourists as soon as possible. But right now we are in between the economic and the public here. So it's not our main responsibility. The ministry who is in charge now is Ministry of Health. So they have the authority to decide which part to open. And we try to do that. We want, like Thailand, they have a special visa for the longest stay. But they need to meet the requirement set by the government of Thailand. Before that, the Cambodia tried to lose some requirement that we have some sponsorship program. I mean, the company in Cambodia who want to get their worker from abroad or a foreigner come to Cambodia, they have to sponsor the expense of their worker during the quarantine. We try to lose some like that, but after 28 November, all the requirements have been set the same before, so we eliminate the sponsorship program. Right now, we back to the normal. Everyone are the same. So, in just to tell you, in the bubble project, green bubble project, we will try to create the sponsorship program again by letting the travel agency to be the guarantee. So in this project, we will talk to the Ministry of Health to lose some requirement in order to allow the foreigner to freely come to Cambodia. I support your idea. We have to create some creative program to attract more tourists to Cambodia, because after the COVID-19, the tourism market will be tough and very more competitive. So we have to create an attractive program, especially to eliminate the barrier to Cambodia. It's not only Cambodia, another country in the region or in the world, they try to create a new program. But facing the COVID situation right now in every country, all the program has been suspended right now. There's no new program for the, we don't think anything else about the public health, you know. Right now, economic is to put aside, but the public health is the first priority. So we will see if the COVID-19 situation is improved or not, or get worse. We will see. If it get better, we will request a new project to the government. The private sector is our partner. If the private sector is down, the government also going to be down. We are in partner, you know. We want to help each other in this COVID-19 situation. So, yeah.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Sivlin, can I ask you a question? Because this panel is about financial technology and technology in general. I was just wondering, how do you see technology playing a role in the future of tourism? Is it mainly in payments and making payments easier for inbound tourists? Or how do you see that technology and financial technology in particular might be able to help sustain and grow the tourism industry going forward?
Yes, for the technology has played a very important role in Cambodia, especially in the tourism industry. Yeah, now they can book, they can pay through the technology. Yeah, without using the labor. Yeah, so very important. Yeah, and we can see it's more and more improved on the technology. Yeah.
I mean, I think certainly in terms of marketing going forward, with all the new kind of ways that you can present, use AI and virtual reality and things like that online. I think there's a big opportunities there to explore new ways of presenting Cambodia to the international market in a more immersive, perhaps, and interactive way that again will whet people's appetites to come and visit this beautiful country. So I'm sure that the ministry also is thinking in terms of how technology can support Cambodia going forward in the tourism industry. Am I right there, sir?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, we're going to park tourism here. I mean, I do wish you both of you very great luck in what will be a very challenging months and years ahead. I first visited Cambodia in the year 2000, and to see the development in the 20 years since, and then to see what's happened in the 9 months after is just extraordinary and very, very upsetting, and obviously we're all very much wishing well to the industry to recover and get back to the great place it was before this wretched virus came along. So parking tourism there on those rather less than cheery words. We're going to move now to the property market, which again is another significant source of foreign direct investment and foreign visitors to Cambodia. So Tom, I mean, in a similar way to what Sivlin was saying about how perhaps domestic demand has been spurred or promoted to replace some of the drop off in foreign demand. How's that playing out in the property market? Particularly vis-a-vis the demand from mainland China, which was obviously driving a lot of the property market here prior to the pandemic. You'll need to turn your microphone on, sorry.
Apologies. So obviously real estate is an industry that's also been severely impacted by COVID-19 globally and locally in Cambodia. And not only China being a major investor in the Cambodian property market, but also Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, and other markets in Europe and Australia and America as well. There has been a few sort of silver linings though. And when we look at the new builds or the new development space in terms of real estate, because there's still this, even during COVID-19, but sort of more so pre and post COVID-19, there's still a huge need for new housing in Cambodia to meet the population growth, and also to meet the sort of urbanisation into the main cities where the job creation is in Phnom Penh, in Oakville and Siem Reap and so on. In the landed property market, what we call in Cambodia bore, in other markets you might be used to terms such as gated communities or estates. It's sort of been, there's still been steady demand for these houses from the local market, and in Cambodia an international investor can't own landed property. And then, so within the landed property market, there's sort of been two trends happening. Those that have retained their jobs and kept employment, their salaries at 100% is certainly being able to get a good deal at the moment, and these developers are still selling through this time. Although existing buyers of those homes that were sort of leveraging home loans to be able to afford repayments and things on those houses, if their jobs have been affected by the pandemic, banks have up until now been, showing support and trying to help those sort of existing buyers with managing their home loans and deferring interest and things like that. But what has been really interesting is traditionally the condo market was seen to be something only, really it was only marketed ever to international buyers, and it was very popular, and international buyers were sort of seeing the big opportunities in Cambodia, and the buying rates were very high. But what we've seen from a lot of the condominium developers in Cambodia has started to shift to the local market, which I think, I know whether you're a company like us in real estate marketing, whether you're an agency or a property developer, it's definitely not an easy time at the moment. But I think the positive to come out of that is that if you're a condominium developer and you're selling part of your stock off to an international investors, and then part of that is now being bought by local buyers. So you'll have a healthy mix in these buildings where people are actually buying to live in the buildings, and then investors which are hoping to get returns, and there's resale value there in the future. But yeah, definitely the real estate market's been affected by COVID-19, definitely, but I think there's some positives to come out of it too.
Okay. What about in commercial? I mean, we've seen around the world, particularly in countries which have been more heavily impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a real drop in demand for office space, for example. We've seen big companies like Twitter and Facebook saying, we're going to move away entirely from the expensive kind of chain model, which forces our workers to commute, et cetera, et cetera. Are we seeing, because we haven't had such a public health crisis here in Cambodia, because we haven't had such kind of stringent working from home measures, has that same effect been felt here? Are we seeing a slowdown in commercial demand for office space?
Yeah, we are definitely, in the next sort of couple of weeks, it'll be very interesting to see, because I think even though Cambodia has, for lack of better words, sort of escaped the worst of COVID up until now, companies still sort of reacted to sort of global sort of movements, and even though most of the cases were sort of coming in from overseas, local companies or multinationals sort of that were existing in Cambodia still reacted to that sort of earlier on in the year. So there was a lot of activity in the commercial real estate space earlier in the year, not because people were looking for bigger offices, but for companies that were sort of existing in bigger spaces, looking to downsize and having part of their team working from home and part from the office. So yeah, and sort of late or pre-COVID, the sort of developers and the market in Cambodia couldn't build office space quick enough because it was almost 100% occupancy. So that's definitely come off now. I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens sort of with this sort of recent COVID events to the commercial office space. The commercial was sort of the retail sector of real estate was was sort of going along okay, not perfect. There wasn't the international tourism, but certainly we were able to move quite freely around Cambodia if you're or you're a local. And we were seeing sort of retailers really rally together to work together on promotions and to get footfall into sort of whether it's an open market or a mall. And obviously with the recent events of COVID in Cambodia, you know, people are starting to, without there being anything official from the government, but people are really starting to, you know, be careful and take self-preservation measures, which I think Cambodia should, and Cambodians should be congratulated on, because
absolutely. There's a lot of common sense out there which we haven't seen in countries further afield. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So, Tom, I'm going to ask you, Tom, a similar question to that I asked our colleagues from the tourism sector. In terms of technology moving forward, do you see that, and I'm thinking particularly about blockchain for transactional purposes, do you see that the Cambodian real estate market can develop with more transparency and more trust? Because I know there has been a kind of a trust deficit with some developers and some projects gone bad, etc. Do you think that technology can help sustain and build that industry going forward?
Definitely, I think there needs to be a lot of technology introduced into the real estate market, both from the public and you know, private sectors, for sure. Blockchain can be a massive part of that in terms of the trackability and traceability of real estate transactions. Real estate itself globally is you know, through the pandemic, more so than ever in most industries, being huge adopters of technology. And without turning this into a marketing spin for realestate.com, but...
Don't let me stop you.
but for example, right, like, you know, you hear things like people selling property online in China, for example, but we expect that because they're so technologically advanced, right? Where we've ran, and we're currently running an online property expo at the moment, and we've actually generated transactions from people living overseas in countries like America, France, China, Japan and Singapore. So it's, and also locally. So, you know, a local Cambodian person just the other day was able to log on to this platform and actually part way with a $500 reservation fee and buy a property online. Wow. So I think the adoption of technology in the real estate sector in Cambodia is definitely fast compared to markets like Australia, which is what I'm used to. So most property developers have things like 360 tours, and you can literally be sitting in your lounge room at home anywhere in the world and inspect a potential unit via the way of a virtual tour. So I definitely think something like blockchain has a place in the real estate market here and in international markets too. But I also think there's other technology that I think can be introduced to further sort of track the sale of real estate and make the industry in Cambodia a lot more transparent.
I think there's probably a room for a lot more data collection as well, particularly when it comes to sentiment, as we were discussing earlier with office space, with retail space. You know, which way is market sentiment going? How does the industry and the developers respond to that? I think there's a lot of room for more use of data, which is something perhaps we haven't got a grip on.
Yeah. Definitely. And again, like a lot of real estate agencies, businesses like realestate.com.kh, we're also, and I know some of the ministries are really trying to focus on that, both from a data point of view from what's actually sold, but also the consumer sentiment side, which you mentioned as well.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks, Tom. We'll come back to you in just a second. Tapas, I have to thank you for sitting there so patiently, but I'm sure this conversation has been as interesting for you, particularly as someone who represents investors, as it has been for me. But I was going to ask you, there's always cliches about, you know, how crises represent opportunities. If you've got cash in your pocket at the time of a crisis, you're in the, you know, there's all kinds of sort of, you know, what I would say would be cliches about how crises do represent opportunities. Are they true? Is that a truism? And from an investor's standpoint, what sectors would you be looking for opportunities?
Thanks for the question, Julian. And let me try to break it down into two parts based on what Ooctane does. As I mentioned earlier on, as part of Ooctane, we not only invest in startups from a venture capital perspective, but we also do advise our parent group as well as look into more mature transactions from the private equity side of things. So if I go on the venture capital side of things, one thing that I would like to mention, and it's kind of apt in this conversation, is Sequoia Capital, one of the major venture capital firms of the world, had released a memo a long time back in 2008, immediately after the financial crisis. It was called Rest in Peace, Good Times, RIP Good Times. And that kind of, highlighted or predicted that, the times are not going to be good going forward. And similarly, just like His Excellency also mentioned, we are looking at least a 3 to 5 years window, in the future, which will affect, the tourism. But is it going to impact only tourism? I don't think so. It's actually a closed ecosystem. It is going to have, knock-on effects on every other, industry as well. So what we have tried to do, especially in this most difficult year, is, of course, we are looking for investments, but more importantly, we have tried to focus on survival. So it's the same advice that we gave. Today we have only one portfolio company, which is Move, which is in the food delivery side of things. The only advice that we have been giving to them, from the beginning of this year is, focus on survival. This year is not about thriving, but it's all about surviving. Fortunately, because of the sector that they have done really well in spite of the tough market conditions, a lot of competition, and so on. But taking a leaf from there, that's exactly what we are looking for as well in terms of potential investment opportunities, in the sense that we are looking for those companies which have resilience in them. So this is the perfect time to check for those kinds of startups, those kinds of smaller companies, or even bigger companies for that matter, who can adapt, who can stay flexible, who can take care of their costs, who can take some very strong decisions in order to survive for a longer time than it would otherwise have been possible, right? So those are the kinds of things that we are looking at. And that is also the reason why, from a venture capital perspective, we did put on hold some of these opportunities that we were looking at earlier this year, simply because we wanted to give them a bit more time and give ourselves some time to assess whether they have that character in them to, adapt and be flexible. So I think, to summarize, on the VC side of things, we are taking on a much more supportive role in order to assist, advise these startups to ensure that they are surviving, instead of trying to invest in too many companies. But when I come to the other side of the equation, on the private equity side and also on the SMEs and slightly bigger companies, I think I agree with the the cliche that you mentioned. I would say it's not a cliche. Yes, there are opportunities, but I would still like to highlight those opportunities with a grain of salt. One thing that I would like to mention, that in my opinion, and the whole COVID across the world is more of an economic crisis rather than a healthcare crisis. So likewise, if you take that same statement back to Cambodia as well, and of course, we have been very lucky, and I'm simply impressed by the way the Cambodian people have actually reacted and stayed proactive. We haven't seen the worst, and I touch wood that stays the same going forward. But irrespective of how small or big the healthcare crisis is here, it is still going to impact economically a lot, just like we heard from before, at least 3 to 5 years, right? And add to that, there are some other macro factors as well. For example, there has been a partial withdrawal of EBA tariffs, this year, and so on. So we need to ensure that we look at these, advanced stage opportunities from that perspective. And on the second point is, as I think it was Tom who mentioned about the cash situation. So at the end of the day, at the end of the day, it's all about, how strong you are from a financial perspective when it comes to cash flows, right? It's a closed ecosystem. So even if you do have cash or capital to deploy, and we look into, good opportunities which are available cheaply today, thanks to the COVID crisis. Question is, even if the business model is strong and it is just a temporary cash flow situation, question is, how temporary is it? Will the customers, because at the end of the day, these companies are dependent on their clients, their customers, business partners to be able to pay to them, right? Question is, are those clients, are those enterprises, financially stable, financially strong on their balance sheet to be able to pay them? If that is not the case, even if we do deploy capital in those companies, will we be able to, get back those returns that we expect? If you talk about payback periods or IRR and all that fancy gimmick stuff. So that's a bigger question that we need to ask ourselves. Opportunities are there, but the question is, are those opportunities, realistic enough to be able to give us back the returns that we are expecting? Having said all this, and this is where I would like to highlight again what we mentioned, we being part of a bigger group, that is the World Bridge Group, which is strong in real estate as well as logistics, it definitely helps because it helps us, be very focused and stick to our strengths. So when we look into investment opportunities, and this is going on to both VC as well as private equity side of things, we always try to stick to our strengths. We always try to see where we as a group, and not just Ooctane, can actually add value, whether it is logistics, whether it is FinTech, where I come from in terms of background, and so on and so forth. So if that kind of synergies we are not able to see, we usually try to stay away. So there are opportunities. I personally am very optimistic. And I hope, and I'm sorry, His Excellency, I would say that I hope the recovery happens in, let's say, 2 years instead of 3 years, because that will have, good positive impact on the other sectors as well. And of course, we are all quite willing and ready to work together with public-private partnerships as well as development partners and all this. But I'm optimistic at the way Cambodia has handled so far. Cambodian people have stayed resilient. Our own portfolio companies have stayed resilient. And I think it's just, we're just hoping for vaccines. But I think in addition to vaccines, it also says a lot about the character of the economy. So we're very hopeful on that.
Tapas, maybe, I think when people think about VC and private equity and all that kind of stuff, the thought is often around tech. And as you said, logistics and sort of the service industries like that. We're dealing with, on this panel, we have people representing the tourist and some real bricks and mortar industries, including property. Do you think, and maybe this is your opportunity to speak directly to His Excellency, does tourism in Cambodia represent an investment opportunity, notwithstanding the rather grim prognosis we have? But going forward, do you think there are opportunities there for investors? And if so, what should they be looking for?
No, absolutely. I think even though I mentioned that we stick to our strengths, that does not mean that we are not opportunistic. So yes, in tourism, especially considering the fact that a major proportion of the GDP comes from tourism and services, definitely there are opportunities. Some of the examples Ms. Sivlin already highlighted, that we are seeing a lot of uptick in terms of domestic tourism. There are definitely a lot of opportunities when we think about how technology can play a bigger/better role in it. I'm not an expert, but I definitely look forward to some guidance from His Excellency on how these things can be done, His Excellency as well as Ms. Sivlin. But yes, if there are those solutions, and I'm pretty sure there are such solutions in other parts of the world, and there is no problem in trying to customize similar solutions for the Cambodian market as well. So even if it is just for domestic tourism, because I think international tourism is going to take some time. So technology does play a part. It has a role to play for sure. Unfortunately, I haven't seen that many major opportunities yet, primarily because they're all struggling today. But having said that, we are always open. We are always willing to, work with, the government, His Excellency, as well as the private sector, as well as development partners, wherever there is an opportunity, even if we are not, very strong from a tourism perspective background, we are ready to, work with these partners from investment as well as from a support perspective.
Your Excellency, just to follow up on that, do you see, I mean, obviously the Ministry of Tourism's main mandate is to attract tourists, but do you also see an opportunity, as Tapas was just outlining there, for the ministry to work more to attract investors into tourism, people who can help build a longer term industry, build sustainability, bring in outside capital? Because, I mean, the wonders of Cambodia aren't going away over the next 5 years, notwithstanding the fact that the tourists might not be here. So does that perhaps encourage you to look more beyond the traditional kind of tourists from China or from the West or wherever it may be, towards appealing to investors, maybe working with the CDC and others on this?
Julian, actually, in tourism, Minister of Tourism never work alone.
Right.
We work with another ministry or a partner or private sector or developer to construct tourists, because tourism is not just a sector alone. We have to connect to another sector. For example, Tapas said that at least 2 years, you are positive, right? But after COVID, it's not when the COVID finished, people come and visit, or the investor come to Cambodia. If I guess, after COVID is the economic crisis. So the people will find their job, because during COVID, a lot of people lose their job. The company closed and suspend. So 1 year or 2 years, they had to recover. The worker try to find job. The company will reopen on restructuring their business. So it takes time. For me, after, we already have the vaccine. But how long it takes to all the country in the world to get the vaccine? At least 1 year. An economic crisis, 1 or 2 years. So it's 3 years. Maybe it's the time. But during this time, the Ministry of Tourism already have worked with our partner, for example, China, to increase the investment in Cambodia, and to lose some requirement for the Chinese tourists to Cambodia. So we try to determine which country is the safest to come to Cambodia. So we never work alone,
Yeah. But I mean, I think as well as you rightly point out, there is an economic crisis that is robbing people of their incomes around the world. On the flip side, there is also an incredible pent-up demand. You've seen that people have been on these flights to nowhere from Singapore Airlines just because they missed the whole experience of traveling. They get on the plane, they circle, have a horrible dinner in their economy class seat, land again, and that for them has been... So there is going to be this real pent-up demand for those who are still lucky enough to have survived the crisis with some money in there. So how do you deal with that extra demand and the competition for that demand? Because you're going to be competing with Vietnam, with Thailand. Again, is it through partnership by working together with Vietnam and Thailand and Laos and other neighboring countries to create these sort of travel corridors that open up all of us, Indochina, to tourists?
I'm not sure about all that, but right now we have many projects, and another department who in charge of promoting Cambodia with in the region or in the world, called the Marketing Promotion Department. So they work closely with another country to jointly promote ASEAN as one destination. So I think we are not working alone, as I said before. We are working in the region with the Asian country and also in the world to attract tourists, not to Cambodia only, but to the region or ASEAN.
Okay. Fantastic.
And there is no worry, we are competing, but we work together for this. So right now, Ministry of Tourism also work closely with our travel agent, already been closed, and also to the airline, National Airline of Cambodia. like Tapas said, that we are now in the processing of surviving.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the government also have policy to help the airline, for example, on tax and also on allowance. And also right now, the Ministry of Economic and Finance, they create what we call the credit guarantee for the business after the COVID. I mean, we have created the institution to guarantee the business, the credit for the business to get the lower interest rate after the COVID. We already have that structure, but right now we are facing the period of COVID in Cambodia, the spread of COVID in Cambodia. So all the projects has been suspended a little, and we will start again after the situation is relieved.
Okay. Thank you, sir. That's a very interesting insight. I've just been told that our panel is now coming to an end. This has been a fascinating discussion. I just want to give everyone one last opportunity, perhaps, to conclude, maybe with a bit of a crystal ball gaze into what the future, really looks like. Maybe starting with you, Tom. I mean, in 3 years from now, how would you, if you were to cast your mind forward that far, do you see how do you see the real estate market flourishing in Cambodia?
I just think that the Khmer middle class and the growth in that's not going away, even though it's been halted by COVID-19. So there's the need for more housing. So given that COVID-19 goes away in the 2 years, then by the third year it should be, it should sort of recover. I'll also say that, the sort of activity that was happening in Sihanoukville, I think it's given sort of the government great time to get back into Sihanoukville and put in the right infrastructure to handle the tourism that will definitely return to the coastal region of Cambodia.
Terrific. Sivlin, if you're still with us, can you give us a brief summation of how you think the tourism industry will continue to adapt and to survive through these difficult times? I think she might have left us. Okay. So, Tapas, over to you. So, with your crystal ball, how do you see foreign direct investments? Obviously, looking beyond the 2 years that we've kind of outlined as being the very tricky times. Beyond that, how do you see that coming back?
I think I've always been optimistic in terms of how the future holds. I always believe, we are going to overcome it. Humankind has always overcome these kinds of situations in the past and will continue to do so. So even in terms of investment, from a foreign FDI perspective, whether it is 2 years, 3 years, or even 4 years, worst case, it is going to, increase. It is going to continue. I was really fascinated with the example that Tom mentioned, when it comes to the usage of technology, as Julian, you highlighted, right? It was very fascinating to see that one end-to-end transaction has happened completely online when it comes to real estate. So, I mean, that's something that, it's very fascinating to hear today in Cambodia. So technology is going to play a major role, whether it is in the sectors that we specialize in or even in tourism, hospitality, and all these kinds of services. But when it comes to opportunities, when it comes to FDI, when it comes to investment, we are definitely very optimistic. It is going to continue, and I would say 3 years is definitely a good enough time to get back to that situation where we were, let's say, last year.
So, Your Excellency, to finish with you, these are two very optimistic sign-offs from our colleagues, Tom and Tapas. Can you perhaps share something, a similar summation about how you see the industry in 3 years' time?
In 3 years' time, I think in 3 years' time it's just a vision that we expected. But the present time, the act of present time is affecting the future,
Yeah.
So we have to work together, not the one sector in tourism, also the real estate, because the real estate also depend on the tourists to come to buy their condo, to buy their apartment in Cambodia. So there is nothing work together. If we have any problem, we can talk around the table. So we can talk and we will find the solution. So maybe in 3 years or 2 years, as Tapas said, it's not depend on what is expected, But if we act together right now, the time will be shorter.
Sure.
And we will go through all together to get past the COVID-19. You know, the company in Cambodia are right now flexible. They adapt to the customer need. So as Champio Sivlin said that all some travel agents, they change their market from inbound tourists to the domestic tourists and to serve the Cambodian people to another province. So that's nothing else. So we can work together. If nothing, we can talk and we will find a solution.
Thank you very much. I think that's the key message, is that partnerships are going to be everything going forward, and that we all need to work together as best we can to get us through this crisis and out the other side to get back to the very real growth and expansion of the property market, of the tourism market in Cambodia. Gentlemen, ladies, I would like to say thank you very much. Perhaps next year we'll be able to do this in person. I would look forward to hearing updates from you all about how it's going in all your respective industries. But we're going to have to leave it there for now, and to say wish you a very good afternoon, and to thank you very much for taking part in what I have found to be a very interesting and illuminating panel. Thank you.
Thank you.